Hi, everyone. So we're here for the final advisory committee meeting for the Resilient South Norwalk project. Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking an hour on a Friday afternoon to take a look at this with us. We're wrapping up. We're coming to the end of our work here, and we are going to be putting this together as a final report and submitting it to Circa and to the city. On the call today I'm having a hard time seeing who's here, but I think it's Jeffrey Morrison Logan from AECOM.
Yep, I'm here. Michelle, I'm having trouble getting my video to work. I'm not sure if there's something you can do on your end. It's locking me out. So I'd wave, but I'll do the audio wave here, Lorraine. So I'm here as well.
Okay. And I believe that John Jasinski and David Murphy are on the call.
Hi, everybody. I think David's here.
Yep.
Okay,
Hi.
great. So I sent this out to Michelle earlier, and I know probably everyone hasn't had a chance to really take a look at it so in great detail. And again, I would preface this with saying that this is a draft. We're still updating a number of the elements, mostly some tweaking of some minor things, but the majority of the presentation is here. And I'm just going to kind of walk through and focus on the executive summary, which is the beginning portion of it. And then we'll walk through the whole document. And, if anyone has any questions or comments or anything, just, holler, put your hand up and we can stop and talk about it. But I would like to say it's been really great. This has been a terrific project for our group, and we've been very happy to be able to be working with South Norwalk, with the city of Norwalk, and with Circa. So we're excited to present this. Just moving into we've been working with the planning department with Stephen and Michelle and Alexis. So thank you for all your help and assistance with this. And the advisory committee listed Circa, and then our consultant team, which is AECOM, and then we've also had help with FHI Studio. So just starting with the executive summary, we are. Do you see this band? Maybe not. Okay, good. Just an introduction for where the project is located. I mean, we've all heard about this over the years, so I'm not going to go into great detail on some of this stuff. We want to get to the information that is new. But the study area is single family, multi-family residential with warehouse and marine industrial in South Norwalk. In the project overview, this is one of 7 of the pilot projects for the Circa. Their efforts in Fairfield and New Haven counties. South Norwalk was one, and their issues when they looked at this as a pilot project, the 2 issues that were more prominent were the flooding in this area, near Concord Street and Day Street down to Woodward Avenue, and heat. We are looking at the project resilient design. We're really looking at resilient corridors in this particular project, but certainly other aspects of the process of analyzing resilient design is looking at community development, promoting healthy ecosystems, developing energy, economic, and social resilience, and of course, promoting flood and heat resilient infrastructure. And again, the main focus for this project was the resilient corridors. And this is just a reminder that the main goal for this project was to develop a resilient corridor for the present and for the future community of South Norwalk. So that with this connection, that the homes and the businesses be able to connect from the upland areas for emergency services in excessive heat, and also storm events that are currently occurring, and also in the projected conditions in 2050 with sea level rise. We had a number of workshops for the public. We had 3. These are some photos from our last one, which I think was quite successful. This was in person. The last workshop in October was in person, and we did a walking tour of the area around Concord Street. The first workshop was in January, the second in June. In January, we presented the introduction to the project, and then in June, we presented some of our information about adaptation options, including the introduction of the Resilient Toolkit, and started to get feedback from the public and from everyone about what kind of priorities within that toolkit we should be looking at for the next phases. Things that came up during pretty much like all 3 of the workshops, concerns about flooding, of course, on Water Street, Woodward Avenue. Mentioned that there were concerns about hazardous materials within the flood zones. The lack of street trees was mentioned a number of times. Increased density and development pressures, signage for education about flood events, and increased truck traffic and vehicular traffic along Woodward Ave and Meadow Street. And we started to get into the preferred options, and this is where we introduced our Resilient Toolkit. This is an approach that really gives some flexibility for the city to take a look at different types of adaptation strategies to address flooding and for heat. It's certainly something that can be varied depending on the size of the project or funding, so that it's quite flexible for implementation. And it also, this is, even though we've analyzed this for this study area for South Norwalk, a number of these toolkit pieces could also be replicated in the rest of the city. And from that, we from lots of comments, we focused on looking at 2 locations within the study area to consider doing elevated roadways. We looked at preliminary design for elevating Concord Street and Water Street to the Burritt Avenue intersection to an elevation of 9.5. And also a section of Woodward Street to the south that would connect at Sable Street all the way up to Lowndes Avenue, again at the same elevation of 9.5, and that was based on the 10-year projected, the 10-year storm projected for 2050 with a sea level rise of 9.59. So this was the limit that we felt would be a good elevation to be able to have a continuous resilient corridor that would be just about at the above the level of the extreme flooding in 2050. These are some renderings of, this is the shows before and after.
Nick, do you have a quick question?
Oh,
I do. I can hold it to the end if you want. I'm not sure. I forgot if you want us to hold on to the end for questions.
I don't know if we said.
I would jump in, Nicholas. It's
So one thing that came up on the walking tour was a number of folks were saying the path of the corridor may not have made sense from their perspective. Did you guys look at that at all from a consideration? And I know this is just probably just like one of many options, not like the way we're going to necessarily do it, but I just wanted to ask if you guys thought about that in any way.
When we had done the analysis, we had looked at what we thought was the best alternative based on where the elevations were and where the flooding seemed to be coming from for the flood pathways. And it might not have been, it was harder to describe that in the out in the field, but we did feel that this was the probably the most optimal route.
Because it's the
Okay.
driest route all the way to where we
It's-
want to bring people.
Driest, shortest, connecting,
Gotcha.
you know, from A to B.
Gotcha. That's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. So again, these are the renderings that you have, I think, have already seen, but this is the before. This is Concord Street looking east, and showing some of the mitigation of elevated roadway, opportunities for possibly having green infrastructure, increasing the urban canopy, and making this a resilient corridor, not only for flood to make that connection to South Main Street and to Water Street and the Burt, but also to make it a more pleasant and cooler pathway in connection for pedestrians between the marine area, some of the housing area, and the uplands and into the downtown. The second was Woodward Avenue. And again, this is a photo from a storm, previous storm, and some of the flooding. You can see this is a similar location in that looking south on Woodward Avenue. Again, having expanded the urban canopy, shifting the roadway so that there is a opportunity for some green infrastructure and a green buffer, and for grading between the single family homes and this new proposed roadway. We made this to have more like a boulevard with a median, so that again, we'd have more opportunities for green infrastructure in the median itself. And then it also had the expanded opportunity with to be able to locate a bike pedestrian pathway that would connect to the public path, to the public park that is just south of here, the Village Creek Public Park, and to some of the residential areas in the center on Lawrence Ave and then further north. So, just in summary of the executive summary, we looked at a lot of these different actions. We've put together a list of what we think, you know, we would recommend for like the next step action items. I mean, everything needs to have further study. We certainly, you know, these are guidelines and this is a planning level. And it's, you know, we've got a number of things here that we listened and heard a lot of comment from, and we've listed the elevate the roadways for maintaining, again, that vehicular and emergency connections within the study area and having that safe, clear out of flood connection corridor. Another step that seems to be one that we would recommend the city consider is looking at flood modeling and to update the stormwater system, and maybe possibility of tide gates, to look at the pipe system for backups, some evidence of possible backups for flooding in the upland areas, and also look at the outfalls with the sea level rise. Certainly the elevation of the outfalls may need to be analyzed. Incorporating green infrastructure in the corridor and other locations to sort of, again, to manage the stormwater through things like permeable paving, maybe stormwater planters, and the possibility of some curb extensions, which gives you more opportunity for stormwater, bioretention swales, etc. Expanding the urban tree canopy for the corridors for pedestrians and bicyclists to provide healthy and safe environment for the community. Again, bringing down the heat island effect in some of the areas that have high impervious surfaces and high heat index. Adding signage at the limits of the climate impact zones. Again, so it gives an opportunity to educate the public about both heat and about flood, so that they know that if they're crossing into an area that has a tendency for, especially with flooding, that they become aware of what those limits would be, and so they can understand the risks. Expanding the resilient hub locations. I know that we have, the city has a couple of cooling centers, but looking at the possibility of expanding those locations and having them not just for heat, but also for flood, to address locations that the public can go to in extreme cases of both. And then the last was to develop a resilience overlay district. And I think that we talked about that briefly. That may be something that might be expanded, or be a project that might be able to get underway at some point, but start to look at developing the overlay district for future development. I mean, I'm going to go through the rest of the document. The rest of the document has all of this information and a lot more detail. I can go through this relatively quickly, but are there any questions at this point about the executive
In the
summary?
green infrastructure category, would you consider sort of like some of the buffer stuff that you guys talked about in addition to tidal gates or coastal buffers or anything like that? I know it had come up from time to time.
Oh, for doing like a berm?
Yeah.
The berms, yeah, those are definitely, they're still in the toolkit in the further in the document. We didn't focus on those for this, but those definitely are something that could be further studied.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I have a question. So all of these are amazing things to do, but they all cost money. So I'm wondering if there's, preferred ways of raising capital funds for municipalities like ours. I know one thing we're considering is a stormwater authority. Is that something you'd recommend? Are there other types of finance vehicles for purposes of raising money to do this work?
We've taken a look at some benefits analysis, and we do have some preliminary costs in the back. I don't know if Jeffrey has any, can jump in with any response to the funding piece.
Yeah, I think it's pretty common having a plan like this that has aspirations of doing some big things in it, that understanding the costs and understanding the funding mechanism. So you'll see in one of the appendix that there's several projects that we do some cost estimating for and some of the cost benefit analysis. It's typically that cost benefit analysis that would be included in grant applications that are either local, state, federal applications that would justify that there's actually a benefit here that's worthy of investing in as well. So having that as a draft in this report, I think, will go a long way towards raising those dollars. I think the other part, and Lorraine listed probably half a dozen recommendations, there'll be further depth within each of those buckets that she mentioned. Things like continuing to work with your DPW department when it comes to your capital and budgets, and to be able to start to program, set aside dollars to implement these things over time, and to also be able to take some of these projects to like schematic and design development level of detail, so that you can further understand how they're going to get built and their timing and so forth. So yes, incremental, yes, a lot of dollars in this, but we'll be showing a little bit more detail on some of those actions as we get there. But the good news is you got a vision. You have the ability to use this vision to go after dollars and work with your local departments to start to chip away at a lot of these pieces. And some of them, like street tree planting programs, for example, could be ways that you start to develop a program and implement this not only in here, but citywide as well. So absolutely, things like you're mentioning would be great.
What feature do you think gives the best bang for buck effectively? Like what feature solves some of the problems or helps mitigate the flooding at the best, the fastest potentially to just start working on that? Or maybe we'll get to that later with the cost benefit page.
I mean, I'll dive in here a little bit too. It's actually an interesting question because of the existing conditions in South Norwalk where there's so much of it that could potentially be underwater. If you ask that question in terms of a flood risk mitigation, you're quickly into raising roads and doing these things. If you ask that same question about, heat and shade, developing a low cost shade tree program that could be done over time could be a pretty low cost. You ask that same question about resiliency center in terms of having a spot during a major event that could go. So kind of depending on what bucket you're in, that could be answered 2 or 3 different ways. I think the hardest one is probably the flood. Probably the easier one is probably some of the shade stuff. And then with the right partnerships and maybe retrofitting of some buildings, these resilience center and cooling centers with some targeted investment might bear a lot of fruit on that. But Lorraine, that's just my take on some of the things that done.
And the only thing I would add is that I know on a couple of these, doing a more deep dive analysis of the flood modeling, really getting that. We've done sort of a cursory, planning level of, but it becomes clear that, getting that information not only helps with like the, for your stormwater infrastructure, but also, considering the elevating the roadways and understanding that a little more detailed.
Right. And along those lines, Lorraine, looking quick actions in stormwater, what can you do with some of your catch basins and some backflow, proactive installations like that could help with some short-term stuff as well. So Steve, I know you had a question with your hands raised.
Well, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we're actually going to take ARPA funds, and Alexis has funds as well. So we're working with DPW, and we're going to work with TMP on actually designing the intersection at Day and Concord, if I have that right, which is one of the intersections proposed for elevation. So we're going to look at doing that now in terms of design, and also bring on the same firm to have them look at Water Street, to look at the elevations and look at dry access routes off of Water Street. So we're going to evaluate that. That's our plan, to probably start that later, mid or late 2024.
That's great. That's great that you're already into implementation mode as well. So Chris?
Yeah, let me jump in here. So I sent in some written comments back in August. So hopefully you saw those. The one has sort of been covered here a bit. And in terms of bang for a buck, backflow preventers on the outfalls to prevent flooding on Water Street. Now, that is not going to help in a hurricane, but this is almost a monthly event with certainly at high tides, king tides. There's 3 or 4 months a year where, probably more than that, probably 4 or 5 months a year now, that the high tides, both the full moon and the new moon, produce flooding on Water Street. And that's what people post on Facebook about every time it happens as an example of cities' incompetence. So if you go out and spend, $50 million on, flood prevention for a hurricane, but it still floods on Water Street because you haven't done the flow prevention, it would make everybody look really stupid. So that's that. And the other comment I had was about the resilient corridor. So it's a good idea, but in my opinion, it does about a third of the job. It falls short. You guys did the hard part, getting down Woodward Ave with all the cross streets, and then you stop. So you can't get out of Village Creek. You can't get out of Harborview. The intersection of Woodward and Dock Road is very low. That floods. There were cars stalled out there during Hurricane Sandy. That's probably elevation 6 or 7. I used to live in Village Creek, so I'm well familiar with this, and I lived through the Hurricane Sandy there. And then you have 2 more cross streets at Yost and Sable, and then you have the long stretch of Longshore Ave all the way out to Harborview, which is also the access to Manresa, which, as we now know, will be a housing development. So you have a third future neighborhood, none of which are addressed by your resilient corridor because you stopped short. And you did the hard part, getting through the denser part of the neighborhood with the cross street, meeting cross street. The rest of it is relatively simple from an engineering point of view. Longshore Ave is just fill at that point. The lower part of Dock Road, The first driveway is one dock, and that's actually up a bit. So you got the right idea, but you stop short, in my opinion. I wrote all that up with a lot of this detail. And the other point I made was that a lot of this resilient corridor you're talking about is State Road 136. So, from all of Water Street, Burritt Street, and Woodward Avenue, I don't think it's Woodward Avenue from Burritt to Meadow is all State Road 136. So none of this can be done without DOT buy-in. So just, and I don't know if DOT has any inclination, any idea of what we're planning here. So that's my thoughts. I put those comments in writing. Interesting what you all think about that.
Thank you, Chris. Certainly I appreciate that you acknowledge we went through the hard part because it was a bit challenging. I would just reinforce what we had said earlier, that this again is the guidelines, and that the next step is to really expand and go into a more detailed engineering look at this whole idea of the resilient corridor. We went to the study limits as were defined. So
what does that mean? South Village Creek wasn't in the study limits. Your study limit stopped at Burwell.
Yeah, I can take some of this on, Chris. This is David
Sure.
Murphy speaking from Circa. So in our experience working with towns and cities in Connecticut, they've been able to, Guilford, Milford, some other places we've worked, they've been able to use local resources to design and then execute local road elevations, but they've struggled with some of the bigger roads. So we wanted to sort of focus on that. So what you said is exactly the case. We did the hard part. We sort of wanted to focus on the parts that towns were struggling with that we've seen in other places. So to your point, it's a good point, but we think future phases can address more of the segments.
So my thing is, I think you just need to extend the line on your map. That this study is sort of a purpose and need thing, and if the need isn't identified here, the need can easily get neglected in the next phase. And there's a serious need to extend that corridor all the way to Harborview. And this, even if it's not in your scope to study that or price it or anything else, the need should be identified now. That's my point.
That's a fair point.
Can that be added as a goal or / recommendation to maybe in some detail about where the expansion focused areas should be?
Yeah, just extend the line on the map and make it a different line and say future need. It should be identified. That's my point.
That'll actually help us too if we have to go for additional funding, or whether it's outside grant or internal city funds.
Great. Yeah, thanks.
I think the status of Manresa when we scoped this project I think it was still up in the air. So I don't think we focused on that for that reason.
No, Manresa wasn't a known entity at that point, but Manresa turns off before Harborview, and Harborview in and of itself is all private road, but the city street, and I think Longshore is maybe 8 feet. It's not an accessible corridor by all the definitions you've created.
Yeah, I think we're sensitive to focusing on private roads with this sort of public money and public study.
No,
so I think
I'm acknowledging that, but Longshore Avenue is a city road.
Right. So it's a fair point. We'll make sure we include something in there about future phase for that.
Harborview folks are going to have to wait out Longshore Avenue, but that's their business, what elevation their streets are.
Also, I think when we had a conversation about the backflow prevention, I think there was some feedback from engineering that they had tried something with that before, but it didn't work. So
That's correct.
Yeah. So Vanessa, if
unfortunately,
you want to
yeah,
elaborate on that.
of course. So we ended up having that in a lot of our outfalls throughout that area. And what happened was that the rats ended up eating all the seals there and really didn't work. Was really, after that was a nightmare to remove them because it was causing more issues than solutions. So that's why we do not ended up installing them anymore.
So Lorraine, do you want to keep on going through?
Yeah,
and maybe
yeah.
just given the time,
Yes,
knowing
we-
that many folks have seen parts of this before, this is really just a deeper dive onto things that Lorraine's already gone through. So maybe just more of an awareness of what's in here as we go through it to
Yeah.
leave enough time for conversation.
Right, because we're already at 3:45. So I'll just go through quickly, background and context. The history, context, history, background of this area and South Norwalk. A summary of the issues and what we're looking at and South Norwalk today, the climate challenges. We did a summary of the role of Circa and how this particular project was selected, and this location was selected by the Circa program. Now we go into a little bit more of the understanding what the place, getting closer into, instead of looking at it broadly, let's get down and look into the project limits and the details. We did a number of visual assessments looking at the existing conditions. Spent time on a number of days on the site. We looked at what the area is as far as community connectivity and the idea of, how long does it take to walk from one point to the park and from the train to the Burr intersection to get a sense of scale and connections. Support about the city's program for walking and encouraging walking. And as we all know, there's quite a bit of, you've got a lot of projects going on. We've taken a look at all the projects that were happening during the study time, become familiar with other things that were occurring in Norwalk, other planning endeavors. The zoning map was really key because it becomes very clear that you have the industrial and residential mix. And then the small section for the marine commercial. And then we looked at the current and future conditions, specifically for heat and then for flooding. So we looked at the heat locations for exposure and sensitivity. Looked at what the vulnerability score was to see where the areas of more concern to key in again to kind of figure out the locations that we want to focus on. We looked at larger areas of impervious surfaces that were clear from a lot of the aerial and analysis that we did. And of course, it doesn't, take much to also look at the fact that that's the same as, the lack of tree canopy. So many times those overlap. So again, it started to just give us some information about, where we should start to look at more closely. And we also included some of the cooling centers, locations, and what the city is doing right now and what they have for facilities. Moving on to flooding, the three sources of flooding for stormwater, for extreme rainfall, and for tidal waters and storm surge. And the 100-year storm depth for current. And this started to give us some idea about flood pathways. We looked at the 100-year storm depth for the projected future, 2050. And then we also started to take all that information and then use elevation information so that we could really get a sense of where the flood pathways were for the existing 100-year storm, as well as what it would be projected for the 2050 100-year storm. And again, that allowing us to understand the site and where the sources were for at least for the overland flow from the harbor and from Long Island Sound. We took a look at the brownfield sites, that EPA's brownfield sites that from the public information. So we get a sense of these areas that we need to be aware of when doing the study. And the analysis of the existing pipe system, the existing stormwater system, to be able to pinpoint and look at some areas that we right away can see where, the larger pipes are going into smaller pipes before the outfall. So again, that allows, it informs the city that they might want to take a look at, with the DPW, take a look at the whole system, maybe sooner than later. We did that for all three of these areas, these sections. We went through and looked at from north to south, looking at the depths of flooding. And I'll go through these pretty quickly, but these are those visual, this was really helpful, I think, for the public, but it was a visual graphic to show how a change in the road elevation would be with the flood elevation in different locations. For existing road elevations and what it would be for a 2050 flood scenario. And then just a summary of the current and the future conditions. And we start to get into the adaptation options. And this is what we had talked about earlier about the resiliency kit of parts. And we had this whole series we looked at lots of different things that went from mitigation options that were much more structural to things that were non-structural, and also, how we organize that based on, mitigation options and strategies that would keep you cool, keep it dry and keep it safe. So divided those to understand them better. And then each of these go into a little bit more detail about the pieces of the toolkit, stating what the application would be, what some of the benefits would be, some of the challenges of using these types of strategies. So from flood barriers, tide gates, stormwater system, which we mentioned, some of the berms that we had talked about earlier, looking at community resiliency hubs, signage at the limits of the flood areas, looking at brownfield remediation sites and incorporating that, developing resilience overlay districts. And then we had we looked at the whole project area and sort of designated where we were recommending each one of those types of toolkits to be incorporated and could be used. And as I mentioned, this certainly could be replicated into other parts of the city. In this next set of slides, we have the 10-year storm. This is a present day. This is, again, we've seen these figures quite a bit. We had looked, previously we'd looked at a 100-year storm, and we made a decision for the preferred analysis to look at a more higher frequency of storm. So we looked at the 10-year storm instead. So this is a map that shows what the 10-year storm would be present day, and the limitations you can see in the blue, and then oops, sorry. And again, it starts to help us understand with the flood pathways and how it changes as it's projected for 2050 between the present day and the projected future with sea level rise and elevation change from 7.59 in present to 9.59 in 2050. So as we started to look at all these different toolkit options, we started to realize that there might be opportunities to form a connection with some elevated roadways. We knew that these were sort of critical. We looked at locations that had fewer single-family homes because of knowing that if you're going to elevate the roadway, you'd have a much more difficult time at smaller lots with single-family homes than larger open parking lots or large, open spaces. We started to do that analysis, and then try, as far as like connecting these two locations versus going straight up through Woodward in order to make these sections shorter for lots of reasons, financial and disturbance. That the idea would be to connect the northern section with the southern section by going through the hillside on Quintard Avenue. This goes into more detail about the Concord Street to Burritt intersection and some of the toolkit applications that could be used. Then we got more detailed and started to look at sections and come up with some comparisons of the existing current conditions sections and then a proposed section that would show an elevation change from approximately 7, more or less, elevation 7 of existing up to 9.5 if we wanted to design for the 10-year storm, the projected 10-year storm elevation to be out of the flood. This is at Concord Street at the west end of Concord Street in South Main. We're showing a little bit of a little bit of area of transition that we would have to transition from the 9.5 down to existing elevation. This is quite rough, but it's approximately a 3% slope. So it would be a gradual slope up to the elevated roadway and then back down. The second section that we looked at was a more challenging one. This is at the eastern end of Concord Street between the buildings where it's more narrow. This is the existing section of existing current conditions. And we looked at the elevation. We looked at a couple different options, and this particular one was looking at it as changing the direction of traffic flow to be one way coming from Water Street towards Day Street, allowing a little bit more area on the side to transition. This would need to have some retaining walls, etc., but it gives a little bit more space within the travel lane. We did look at a two-way, and again, as you can see the difference, you get a little more opportunity to do have more buffer on the sides if the roadway is more narrow. We then the section C is at Lower Water Street. This is just about at Burritt intersection. The current condition is shown here, about elevation 6.75, and the proposed elevation, again, in this particular section between Concord Street and Burritt, it's quite wide as far as having open space and some parking lots versus having buildings right up to the edge of the roadway. So again, it was an opportunity, and it was a short section. So being able to do that here gives you a chance to use like a 3-to-1 slope or a 4-to-1 slope to extend to outside the right of way. Here's the section C. And then we wanted to, again, show the existing condition and a proposed illustrative rendering of how that would be changed with the raised road, with a sidewalk, with more street trees, possibilities of incorporating green infrastructure. Then shifting to the focus area 2, which is down on Woodward, we did the same sort of analysis. It's the same thing we just talked about. We looked at other mitigation toolkit locations of where those could be incorporated. We put together two representative sections, D and E. The D is at Lowndes Avenue. It's where we transition from the existing elevation into this elevated roadway system. And at just south of, between Neptune and Miramaki, right in this location. And again, as you can see from the plan, the road is shifted to the west. It's a boulevard design, and with green space on the east side between, as a buffer and an opportunity for grading between the single family homes and the new roadway. So at section D at Woodward Ave and Lowndes Ave, this is the existing layout. And then the proposed layout is starts to show the incorporation of a shared use path or a bike path, a 10-foot wide on the west side of the roadway. Again, I mentioned earlier that was, it seemed like a great opportunity to be able to have some connectivity between the more residential, densely residential area along Westward and Woodward, excuse me, and Lawrence and that neighborhood down to the public park, and be able to take advantage of that if you're going to make these changes. We looked at some of those, again, those 3% slope transitions. The last section is at Lower Woodward down closer to Neptune. And this one is a quite wide section, and it gives you a sense of where the buildings are, the warehouses on the west side and the homes on the east. You can see that it's quite a wide stance. And this would be the change. We'd have the median, the planted median in the center that could also become a bioswale, 1 lane north, 1 lane south, transition, a 5-foot buffer on both sides that would again be planted, but it also would allow you to have opportunity to grade, to start to transition back to existing elevations. And sidewalk on the east side, there's a sidewalk now, that's the residential side, and then the bike path on the west side, which would be further away from the homes, but it'd be on the warehouse side. And then this whole area in through here has an opportunity again to be used to control stormwater. It could be in a non-storm event, it's green space, open space, and if designed, in a certain way, it can be green space and open space that's an amenity for the neighborhoods to have that, but also in a storm event, if designed, it can be also an area for collecting of stormwater. Here's the plan. This is this is the existing view. And this is the illustrative rendering. Again, sort of showing the changes from one to the next. This next set of slides, it addresses looking at the 10-year storm at present day, and we did a very very preliminary conceptual modeling of how it would impact if Concord Street and Woodward Ave were elevated, and how would there be changes in some of the flood patterns. And what we looked at was that in the present day condition for the 10-year storm, with those roads elevated, it does serve as a bit of a block for some of that flood pathway zone. So in the purple, you can see what we think are areas that now seem to, based on the modeling we had done, appear to flood, and at the 7.59 elevation. But with the change in elevation, again, on Woodward and then on Concord Street, that this area may no longer, might block that from flooding. Same thing here. This is if it flooded up to a 9.59 elevation for the projected 2050 10-year storm, you can see that at that higher elevation, it impacts even more by blocking some of that overland, that flood pathways that come across Water Street into that neighborhood. Same thing from the south. What it does now comes up through Woodward. One of the things that we thought we found, which was really interesting, and we talked about this earlier today, is that we didn't look at Meadow Street, but again, with as we've said before, some of the things that we're proposing can be replicated in other areas. And we would recommend that there may be further study if the city decides to look further into this, that the idea of at this edge of the flood zone on Meadow Street, that there might be an opportunity to consider elevating along here. And if you do that, it looks to be that there is a connection here at the northern part of Meadow Street that right now serves as a flood pathway right into this back neighborhood. So based on the elevations, and again, based on what we've looked at, that might be another area that would be of consideration at the next stage of analysis for this.
Lorraine, I'm just going to interrupt quick. We have about 5 minutes left
yes.
before so I want to make sure I have time to close out with what's next steps and so forth too, right?
Yeah. So this is all in the report. Yeah. And we do have the benefit analysis in the back and some of the cost analysis as well. So yeah, I'll stop. I could keep going, but I'll stop. Let's have time for 5 minutes.
So maybe in terms of where we are, congratulations to everyone that's been involved. As Lorraine, you started out with a lot of great work that's gone into the process, into the recommendations and some of the diagrams and the things that are being here as a roadmap as well. This is not where these projects end. It's hopefully where they start, with a lot of different pieces. And Stephen, thanks for sharing what could be next in terms of the city's pipeline. But maybe in terms of next steps, we're looking to get this wrapped up by the end of the month, send this off to Circa as well as to the city, use this as a playbook, as a toolkit, and all those great things. But maybe it'd be good to hear from John just a little bit about next steps, and maybe from Michelle before we close out about where we can go from here, type of thing. So maybe John, do you want to talk about what could be next and what this means in terms of having this report close to being done?
Yeah, thanks, Jeffrey. Put me on the spot a little bit, but so yeah, we're trying to wrap up 7 of these studies as part of Resilient Connecticut over the next month or two, and then we have one full report that we have to deliver to our sponsor that provided the funding for this whole program. And then I think we've started to have some follow-up conversations with Norwalk on a couple of the ideas, one of them being the idea of the overlay district. So we have some researchers at the UConn Law School that are looking into that and looking around for other precedents, and we'll provide some recommendations on what that could look like in Norwalk. So that's ongoing. And then we've also started talking about the idea of a resilience hub or hubs through another proposal. Been talking with Michelle DeLuca about that. And then I think, originally our goal with this was to help the city get some projects that were at a conceptual level with some cost estimates that could go after some of the federal funding that's out there, like BRIC and some of these other programs that have come through in the last couple of years. I think the comment about the DOT needing to be involved is a good one. We've seen in the Stratford project we've been working on, that led to them going after, there's a program called Protect that the federal DOT put together. And so the town of Stratford is partnering with the state DOT on kind of a further study of one of the corridors in Stratford. So I think that might be an avenue in addition to what Steve mentioned. You can move forward some of the local segments, but I think it's definitely time to get state DOT more involved if the city wants to move forward with some of these things. And I don't know, Michelle, if you want to jump in with any next steps from P&Z or the city.
Sure. So on the city side, next steps for us would, once we get the report in hand, distributing it, and then I think usually, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, we'll amend the POCD eventually with this plan. Not sure if that.
I don't know if we need to with this one, just because there's not specific. We could. I'll have to take a look and see. There's like the resilience overlay, but I don't know if we need to amend the POCD to kind of justify doing that regardless. I think that's another initiative the city could just take on. But again, we can evaluate that.
Yeah, I think just in general, just cracking away at the recommendations and getting funding, and just want to thank Circa and AECom for all their help. And this has been a great process and learning experience.
Yeah, it's been
Yes.
great working with you all.
Thanks to AECom, you guys did a lot with limited funds, and it's really it's great.
Yeah, I can second that. We got a lot out of a limited budget for this study, so really appreciate all the work, Rain and Jeffrey.
Wow, it's been great. It's it's been a great project. I'll leave it there. All right, well, again, thank you. I mean, like I said, I could probably keep you until like 5 or 6, so I'll stop talking. So, I talk a lot about this project to a lot of people, not just at this call. So anyway, thank you so very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Good work.
Take care. Have a great Thanksgiving and good weekend.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.